Okay, welcome everybody. We're just going to wait for people to start to finish signing in. We'll take another minute or two as we start to prepare, and I will share my screen here. We're waiting for our final panelist, Paul, to join us. He is the surprise guest, and he is the last one to join, so he has to do like 50
there he
push-ups.
is.
There he is.
He's there.
Sorry,
Hey,
So Paul, we
bearded.
are broadcasting.
Welcome.
We are broadcasting, we are live, and so, all the things that you really honestly want to say about Chris Rising, you can say right now in public.
Perfect.
Don't hold back.
Silence.
Don't hold back.
Silence.
All right. Paul, can you hear us okay?
I sure can. I hear great.
All right, excellent. Well, very good. Well, while we kind of start off here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask folks to make some quick introductions, and we'll sort of get into today's panel. This is part 4 in a series that CREtech and Openpath have been running. We've got a number of different conversations that we've had leading up to this with different architectural design firms, landlords, technology companies. And it's all about how we really prepare the new world order that we're sort of approaching. And whether it's, paying for it, which is what we're going to discuss today, whether it's the technology that goes into place, the processes, the remote work that we need to take into account. And we bring some really thoughtful experts to bear to share their perspective and opinion. We're really lucky to have the group today on board. So I'd like to introduce everyone. We'll start with Chris. If you could introduce yourself, a little bit of background of you and the company, that'd be great.
So I'm Chris Rising, and our company, Rising Realty Partners, it's about 40 people now, and we are about 5 million square feet. We do some significant third-party property management. We're focused between Denver and Southern California. Our real focus has been over the last few years around impact investing in our real estate. So we focused on carbon reduction, health and wellness, and having a social component. So, we felt this was all coming together. We didn't think it'd be around a pandemic, but we really saw that the world was transferring from a baby boomer-led world into where we're at. So I'm excited to talk with friends on the line about how we're going to do this and who's going to pay for it and all. And I really appreciate, James, you've been a real leader in putting this all together, and I appreciate you doing that.
My pleasure. Thanks, Chris. Next, Rob Cain. Rob?
Yeah. Hey, good morning, everybody. And thanks, James, for inviting me on to the panel this morning. Rob Cain, Executive Vice President with LPC West, run the Los Angeles market for Lincoln. And we really sit kind of at a unique intersection for this pandemic, because we've got a 35 million square foot operating portfolio up and down the West Coast. So we're dealing with this real time with our institutional equity partners and our tenants throughout that portfolio. We also have kind of a unique occupier services platform that has really ramped up over the last 3 years, where we're sitting directly with users of space. So we're getting to see real time how this is affecting them. And we've got a little over $1 billion under active construction, both core and shell and tenant improvements going in LA alone. So it's affecting us in all sorts of unique and interesting ways. So looking forward to the discussion today. Thanks for inviting me.
Great, thanks, Rob. And next, Paul. Paul, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Thanks, James. Hey, Rob, how are you?
Great,
good
Paul.
to see you.
You as well.
So, Paul Brindley, I'm Senior Managing Director at JLL in Los Angeles. I focus on the debt side of the business. So that's what I practice daily. Been with the firm for 20 years, and we're involved in all aspects of commercial real estate finance. We work with Rob's firm, we work with Chris's firm, we sell properties for folks, we finance properties for folks, we raise debt, we raise equity. Right now we're starting to crank up our loan sale business, right? So there's things that this pandemic has impacted in the capital markets, and I look forward to discussing those with everybody.
Great. Thanks, Paul. It's great to have you here. And last but certainly not least, Michael.
Thanks, James. Listen, before we get started, I just want to acknowledge your leadership and Openpath support. You know, I feel like since you've been doing these webinars, James, with CREtech and our platform, you've really helped advance the conversation and the dialogue to a point where people are starting to talk about not just will we ever get back to work, but when and how. And I think you've done a great service to the industry. And I think about the ones that I've been on with you, you know, hearing from landlords, hearing from the architects, some tenants. It's been so informative, and I think you're really giving the industry collectively a sort of a glimpse of what we have to do and a path forward. So I want to thank you and Openpath, and I'm super excited to just be a sponge and listen to these great panelists talk about the big question that everybody's asking, which is who's going to pay for this? You know, in all of my conversations with tenants that are friends of mine, with landlords, with brokers as well, that's the question everybody's asking. So I think the timing is perfect, and I look forward to being a fly on the wall listening to this great conversation. So thanks again for the leadership and for organizing it.
Great. Well, it's my pleasure. And for everyone, I'm James Siegel. I'm the president and co-founder of Openpath. We are an access control company. Basically, you can use your phone to unlock the door at your office. It's all cloud-based. And we are one of these prop tech companies that is busy working with the built world to really understand how to respond to both tenant needs with technology, but also security needs given what's happening now post-COVID. So today's conversation, now that we've got through the introductions, I'm going to frame the problem a little bit for the audience to talk a little bit about how we think about this space. And then we'll have an open discussion amongst our panelists about the puts and takes in this conversation around who's going to pay for all this, and then an open Q&A. If everybody could please, who's online, feel free to submit questions using the Q&A tool in Zoom. That way we can moderate those questions and make sure that we get responses to you. If you put it in chat, we might not see it, but if you put it in the Q&A tool, we certainly will. And with that, I always revisit this at the beginning of every single one of these webinars, and it's really just to set the framework for the timing of what this all looks like. You know, we've thought a lot about this in terms of the different phases that we're going through post-COVID, right? There's the flatten the curve phase that we're in right now, phase one. There's the phase that we're entering, which is phase two, which is a modified get back to work. And that's going to be, a lot of variability in that phase as we sort of, put and take and move around to understand how we can do this safely. And then there's, post-vaccine, how we get to a point where we have herd immunity. And that's, a point where you've got antibodies in people who've had the disease, people who are vaccinated and don't, feel like they can get the disease. Until such a point as we're kind of, past all this, whether it's 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, who knows, but there'll be then sort of a new normal of, post-COVID, but kind of pandemic ready. And as we think about this, we've acknowledged that this pendulum over the time frame we're entering now is going to swing back and forth pretty dramatically because of the political and the emotional ramifications. Emotionally, I want to get out of my house and back to work. Emotionally, I'm scared to leave the house because I don't want to get sick. Politically, there's going to be lots of compliance standards put forward, but maybe they're enforced, maybe they're not enforced. Different states, different localities, and different responses from the federal government will kind of mandate how we respond. You can even see today, the federal government has put out its guidelines for all phases for employers in terms of, how to, take care of social distancing, ensure that there's temperature checks, sanitation, disinfection, and the like. So all of these manifest in an interesting way because what happens now is you've got these different things that need to happen. Obviously, things like Openpath, right? Hands-free access to a building where you can press the button on your phone and unlock the door. Those become super relevant. But if you look on the phase two list here, it's not just about touchless access. It's about investments in congestion-free lobbies, occupancy monitoring, elevator capacity management, cleaning stations, mobile and visitor management, tenant communication apps. There's a host of investments, both from a CapEx and OpEx perspective, that need to happen right now. And the question is, who's going to pay for all this? And this is the debate that we're going to have today. This is the discussion as we kind of explore, you know, is it the owners? Is it the tenants? Is it a combination of both? Where do the lenders fit into all this? And then when does the government fit into all this, frankly? So you're going to see that there's this ongoing challenge that we're experiencing on a real-time basis in terms of rent revenue is going down. And it's partially because of, you know, people not, you know, using the space as much. It's partially because of people not being able to pay. And frankly, rent revenue might go down for a little bit longer as people change their footprint. So now you've got owners who financed a building based really on a specific financial model, and that financial model is changing. And you've got, you know, lenders who now have to reposition themselves and think about how do they want to deal with that asset? How do they want to deal with that management company and ownership? How do they want to respond to their investors, debt holders, pension funds, whatever? And then all of that is going to end up with some finger pointing. It's going to end up with some friction. It's going to end up with some amazing partnerships and opportunity. And we want to see how the government and how our respective investor communities all sort of respond to this. So with that, you know, we've got these various discussion topics that we're going to kind of go through. But maybe what I'd like to kind of, you know, start off with a little bit from the tenant perspective. And so, you know, Chris and Rob obviously are working on a day-to-day basis with tenants in their buildings. Obviously, you know, Rob indicated, you know, they've got this occupier services business. So maybe Rob, you can start off, and then let's just make it an open discussion. Let's start with the tenant perspective and then sort of get into the owner perspective on all this. What's happening out there?
Yeah, it's been really interesting over the last 6-7 weeks to watch this evolving from within the users. You know, I would say that there are some themes that are developing, but there are no firm answers yet. Certainly there is a significant amount of discussion happening, you know, over the last 3 weeks about how and when is the right way to get people back to work. I would say just some general themes that we are hearing, you know, pretty substantially is that it's going to be a slow kind of reoccupancy of space. We're going to start to see some phasing, you know, starting in late May, June, probably in 25% increments between now and, you know, over the coming, you know, I would say 6 to even 12 months. No real rush to get people back in. I would say that nobody really wants to be first. There's really no upside of being first. I think there's going to be a wait and see approach. Certainly there's a big downside of coming in too early. I would say that each company is in the process right now that we're working with, and we're working with a pretty interesting diverse group of tenants. I would say our largest clients are some of the FANG companies. We're getting some interesting insights there, and then also all the way down to the small businesses. But let's starting kind of with the larger, you know, FANG type companies. I would say those that are in you know, in the content space, I would say there is definitely an urgency to get back to normal operating. Certainly there's a lot of pent up demand. Studio production has been really ground to a halt. And you know, getting studios back up and running has been a huge theme. Really complicated in terms of how that's going to work. One of the key themes there that we're hearing is just insurance, and how to cover kind of health issues on set, and what that means for overall P&Ls. That's really going to probably have a dramatic impact on some of the smaller studios. And so I would say, you know, the challenge here is that each individual property is going to have its own game plan. Each individual tenant is going to have its own procedures. And as you start to get into the details of how you actually get people back into buildings, it really affects every single movement on a property. And so right now we're going through each of those issues, putting together game plans. But I think you're going to see you know, a real case-by-case basis. You know, access to you know, a car to be able to get to work is a big deal for companies in terms of how they think about re-entering. Those that rely on mass transit, cities like New York, much more complicated set of issues to get people back in. I think LA, we're uniquely suited to get people back up and running because people can drive in their cars. And but then just a ton of focus on path of travel. You know, the valet, you know, what happens when they get to the front door, what happens in the lobby, how do you deal with elevators, how do you deal with common areas in the project? And so, you know, we're obviously focusing on all of those areas right now. Chris, what are you seeing?
Well, I'd say a couple of things. I'd say the first is that we have to recognize this is a complete government taking. I'm not saying that's wrong, but we have all been told, unless you're an essential business, you can't go to work. And so when it comes to paying rent or whether people come in or not, it's a world that we have never seen. And so therefore there's a lot of uncertainty. And if you put on top of that in other recessions and things like that, people just lost their job, not their lives. So you put that on top of it, and a fear factor that's going to come out of this will not be anything, I think, that is really that you can predict, because everybody, panic sets in and things like that. And so at the outset, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, that I think Southern California is pretty unique in that we have this techtainment, we have this production. They're big users of office space. But I think at the core of what we're going to deal with is, number one, I know your buildings, Rob, and our buildings, they're open right now. We don't have a right to say whether a business is essential or not. That's really the business itself, or it's the government. And so we have been working on procedures since the day most people were sent home. And it's from increase in cleaning. We are already dealing with things like when we have contractors who are in our space, not allowing more than 10 people on a floor, about having spacings. All of our elevators or have marks for where they're going to, where people stand, just like the grocery stores. We've been working with all of our tenants, much like you guys have, and working with Gensler and with Healthy Buildings, trying to help those tenants think about their space. Gensler has been a great partner of ours in talking with some of the major law firms and accounting firms about spacing. I think one of the interesting things is that, as devastating as this is for the real estate industry, I think densification wasn't all that good for us either. Big firms taking less space. And I think when you just look at how you lay out an office going forward, density is going to be the bad word. So I think tenants getting smaller is out the window. But I also think there's a new normal that's, I hate the term new normal. There's nothing normal about this. There's a new world. It's not normal when you're wondering whether you should drink Lysol or not just to be healthy. So I hate the term new normal. It's a new world we're going into. But there's some pieces that I find interesting. I mean, if we're not going to BS ourselves, most C-suite execs have been mobile for the last 5, 7, 10 years. I mean, they were not going in for 40 hours a week. I was not. I was on the road. I was traveling. I was trying to fit in a meeting across town with a kid's soccer game. So C-suite people have been dealing with this mobile for a while. And I think what we're going to see happen is that baby boomer mentality is going to be out the window, and that you have to be there at 7:30 and work till 7:30. And it's going to trickle down to everybody. And people are going to look at how they use their office space differently. I really believe the Gensler model of the hub and the brand is important. And you're going to see different work shifts because people are going to come back slowly and they're not going to want too much density. And I think the biggest issue we're all going to face is, where does the landlord, the tenant, the lender, and the government all fit into what the rules are going to be? And I'm very pessimistic that the government is going to give us rules that make sense. They're going to give guidelines. I think from a landlord perspective, we're worried about safety in a building, but we also can't be in a position to deny entry. We're changing our rules. We're going to have thermometers and say, may we take your temperature? If you choose not to do it, we're going to treat you like you're a guest. Even if you're an employee, call your employer saying, do you want to let so-and-so up? And we'll have, then we'll isolate that person up. So I think there's just this mix of things happening. And I think we just don't know. We don't know. We got to get back into it. We got to see it unfold. We've been practicing health and wellness in our buildings a while. We've had hand sanitizer and not having to touch elevators for a while, and now they're popular. So we'll see. But we have to figure out this taking piece.
Well, so Chris, what's happening from both of you guys as owners? What's happening with the rents? So, I've heard that, April was not great, but not so bad. But then everybody expects May to kind of be not that wonderful. What are you guys seeing out there?
Well, these are contracts that people sign. Let's remember that. These are contracts.
Yeah, I would say, across, we've been really tracking it closely across the 35 million square feet on the West Coast. And, I think just on average round numbers, we collected about 80%. That's a kind of office using. We don't have a lot of retail. We don't have hotels. So that's just really kind of an office related number. And it's at certain points, we thought that number might be 60%. So, we're right in the low 80s, that was for April. Certainly next week with May starting, that's going to be really telling, in terms of where we are with respect to rent collection. I think, a lot of tenants paid April just as a knee-jerk reaction, and then they've taken the last month to get their bearings, figure out, the health of their company, the lease, what are the lease guidelines, what are the regulatory guidelines. So May, I think, will be more telling, but a lot of that was for us was co-working related. If you kind of parse out the 20% that didn't pay, there was quite a bit of co-working in there. Companies that are tied into production, post-production, certainly they're feeling the sting of this. Anybody that's is involved in live entertainment venues, restaurants, amphitheaters, those kind of businesses are obviously they're feeling the hurt. So we're really going to be watching closely for May. And the thing that I don't think any of us anticipated is that each of those individual deals need to be. We kind of sit as an intermediary between our capital partners and the tenants, and it's each one is a very delicate negotiation. I would say just on average, the rent relief deals, and Chris, I don't know if this is similar to what you're seeing, but anywhere from kind of 2 to 3 months. I would say most have some sort of deferral mechanism, whether they're paying you back in 2021, even in some cases 2022, or they're adding term, some additional term on the end of the leases. We've had a couple that have said, look, we're going to come in, we're going to pay you 50% rent for the next 2 months. We're going to share in the pain equally. There's no deferral. Those are the tougher conversations. I would say I've been, for the most part, though, the tenants, both tenants and the capital have, I think there's been a lot of empathy back and forth between both. And I think everybody has, for the most part, come to the table in a reasonable way. And there's some pretty good judgment being exercised on both sides. But certainly, a lot of very delicate, tough discussions that have been going on.
Well, I would echo that. I'd say our institutional real estate has done very well in terms of rent collection. It's really it's the smaller retail operator who you have a ton of empathy for. Unfortunately, on one of our assets, we have a CMBS loan, and the special servicer is not home. So we have to do things like issue a default notice, but we can't evict anybody, and we don't want to evict anybody. We're not trying to take the small salmon shop out. We just have to follow a process because these things are so institutionalized. On the non-institutional assets, we've had some great lenders who take the same view. Let's see how we get through the short term. Maybe we do some forbearance. You give a tenant 3 months, and we'll put it into the back end. So I think that kind of hands-on real estate, it used to be what I'd call what you'd get out of some of the bigger banks, which you don't get at all. It's more with the debt funds and with the smaller banks who are very cognizant of what's going on. I'm really interested to hear Paul's take, because at the end of the day, this was a government taking. Nobody did anything wrong. It's starting to shape up where they're trying to make the landlord the bad person, because of course, all these tenants, they can't pay because they've been shut down. The lenders are saying, well, you do have an interest reserve. Well, that interest reserve was equity that was there for leasing reasons, not because the whole economy is going to be told you got to shut down. So it's a very circular system we have here. And the people right now that haven't really spoken up, or what are lenders going to do if they give forbearance with their investors? My personal opinion is the government's going to have to be there as a last resort and basically say to the whole world, you got most of March, April, May, and June covered. Let's start again in July. But Paul, I'd be interested to know, because at the end of the day, as an owner of property, I can only do what my lender will allow me to do.
And while Paul jumps in, I'm going to launch a poll to get what everybody else who's watching thinks. So please go ahead and fill out the poll. But Paul, let's hear from you.
Well, there's a lot there. What Rob and Chris just covered, right? And we're trying to rethink all of these things, right? When we're also a tenant, right? We have those other businesses that property management side. So we're tracking all of that. So we're tracking payments from tenants. We manage 93 million square feet of retail. We've got 400 million plus square feet of industrial. We manage office and some big number as well. So we're tracking that so that we can understand it. Our business specifically in the capital market side at JLL, we're certainly very involved with owners in discussing and understanding what their situation is. And I think generally speaking, with most lenders, they're being cooperative and really want to understand what's going on at the property. The CMBS business with special servicers is a whole different issue, but also, I mean, this stuff happened overnight, right? And we're talking about office right now. That's performed pretty well. 80% collections. Everybody more or less can pay their debt service with 80% collections. That's generally speaking not a problem. Now, but the special servicers have been, think about hospitality and what's happened there. That's been a big change since the middle of March. Huge properties closed down, 10% occupancy. They're not making enough money in many cases to cover their fixed costs. So lenders, if they're not being responsive to an office owner today who may not have a real problem, it's because they're dealing with some of these other things, right? Hospitality on the continuum of kind of best to worst, they're in the worst seat right now. They've had it hit immediately, right? They can't even cover. It's not about debt service. They can't even cover fixed costs. Retail, right? Average retail collections are, depending. It varies very widely. Can be in that 35% range, right? Where malls are 20 or less percent collections, open air centers are 45%. Maybe it varies up to 75% collections in secondary markets and things like that. So lenders are, just like what every owner has done and what every tenant's done. You first kind of went on defense. You did triage. You went into your portfolio to understand where the biggest issues were. You reallocated origination people over to asset management. I mean, all these things are happening right now, and they've happened in 45 days. Special servicers had been laying people off because there were no defaults. Now all of a sudden they have thousands, like $100 billion of CMBS or something like that. 5,000 loans have requested forbearance, right? How do you possibly deal with that, right? So they're dealing with kind of the first problems first. And so it may be frustrating for some owners that they can't get the attention of their lenders, but I think they all want to do the right things. And from what we've seen is they've been very cooperative. And those that really need help, they're granting that forbearance. They're reacting quickly. If somebody just refinanced though, 12 months ago and pulled a bunch of money out, that lender's probably telling them, you need to put more equity in, right? So it's case by case, just like Rob laid out for tenants, right? You have to evaluate the building, to start with the government. You got to start with the building. You got to start with the tenant, and then it goes to the individual and how do they feel safe. And so each one's case by case. That's how lenders are looking at this. It really is a case by case. I mean, some of the agencies on the multifamily side, they have a more programmatic approach. They also have, tens of thousands more loans than other lenders. We service 5,400 loans, commercial mortgages. And so and at one point it was a very, very low percentage that had requested some sort of forbearance. Some of it, just like I'm sure these guys have seen from their tenants, seems opportunistic. And I think we're seeing landlords react to those tenants trying to take an opportunistic stance for some rent relief. What can you get in return, right? What, as a landlord, can you get, an extension of the lease that's maturing in 2 years or something? So that's certainly a big thing for retailers. So lenders are looking at what landlords are doing. What are they having to accommodate and really accommodate? What reserves do they have? It's kind of like even just the whole PPP thing, right? You have to certify that you have need. What is the real need? So lenders are going to work with every single one individually, and that's just going to take some time, particularly when they weren't staffed for this to happen overnight. Chris, I don't know if I
Hey,
hit
James,
on all of those things. Or
can I just jump in and ask a question, James, if you don't mind? So, guys, like, question that I have, and I think I'm seeing some of the questions from the audience, not to put you all on the spot, but, you know, putting you on the spot. So, again, I think, Chris, you had said in the beginning that you guys are all in California. California's going to reopen May 15th, right? So now you've got your assets, and companies are coming back in. So if it's a single tenant facility that you own, Rob, and you'll have whatever negotiations on the CapEx there. But Chris, if it's a multi-tenant facility, and you've got CapEx that you got to put in you got to put in Openpath, you got to get, the lobbies, the elevators. What happens if it's a multi-tenant building? So what is your thinking about, just again, it's a couple weeks away. How are you going to approach this expenditures that are going to seem pretty massive?
Okay, a couple of things. First of all, in Northern California, they're not opening until June at the earliest. May 15th is an LA County directive. It's still the state directive at this point. But as I said earlier, our buildings are open right now, and we already have processes in place. And so one of the things I find interesting about this, same way I feel about grocery store workers and nurses and EMTs, we've got frontline workers, the security guards, the engineers in the buildings, the janitors, the parking people are there. And so we are implementing all of these things we have already. And the fact is, we have to restock on sanitizer and all of that other kind of stuff, but a lot of this stuff was in place and people just didn't notice it. I mean, every one of our security desks 6 months ago has hand sanitizer there. I think the key is, I'd love to use the term high touch, but obviously that doesn't work right now. But the key for all of these buildings is having people who walk in them feel safe. So the importance of security guards, directing traffic, opening doors if you don't have Openpath, if you don't have things like that. We've already, to all of our equity partners and to all of our tenants, we're sending out videos of how you come to Cal Edison and how you don't touch a door, how we are queuing up people to get in the elevator. We have marks. I think most of our elevators are not going to allow any more than 2 or 3 people, depending on the size of the elevator. And our security guards are going to be unbelievably important going forward. And it's nice to see that people are recognizing them. But to me, it's about the community in a building, and there's also liability issues. So I said that we're going to offer where we can. We're still trying to get as many thermometers as we can. We're going to offer to take a temperature. The reason I use the term offer is there's a lot of privacy issues around us demanding it. Now we can then say if you don't want to have it done, we can refuse service to people. We are going to require face masks. If you don't have one, we're going to have one there. But I also think it's going to, what I'm trying to say is these things are already in place. There are going to be investments made over the next year or 2 or 3 years that I think will really be a discussion with the tenant. We just have to, our lawyers keep hammering on us. You just have to meet a reasonable standard so you're not negligent. What are those? Follow the best you can what the county and the state say you should do. But we will have problems. I know we will. We're going to say to somebody, I'd like your temperature taken. Oh, you have a temperature, please do not go in, and someone's going to get irate. And we're trying to train our people how to deal with that. We are sure that we're going to have people who we're going to have to just say to our tenants, this is your issue. This is your employee and your issue. You have to come down and deal with it. Leases are pretty clear when our responsibilities start as a landlord and where the tenants are. And, it's not really for us to say what people do within their space. And that's why we're trying to work with Gensler and such. But I don't know. I'm a little bit cynical. I've said this before. I think everyone's going to be really worried about this as we creep into it. But when I listen to what's happening, friends who work in Shanghai and places like that, people want to get back to what they think is normal as quickly as possible. So I'm a little cynical that we're going to see us a year from now with having the same procedures in place that we're going to have as people start coming back into the buildings.
Chris, that's a great point. James and Michael, we're fortunate. We're a global company, 90,000 employees around the world, and we're learning real time from our colleagues in Asia, in multiple cities in Asia, and then this week in 2 cities in Germany that are going back And so we're following what they're doing and what's working and what's not for our own reentry. And we're kind of launching our whole kind of reentry thing today about for the Americas, and thinking about, and actually really globally, of how we're thinking about this at every aspect of it. But that's what I personally is helping, running a business within here in Los Angeles, is watching what these others are doing. The whole thing about, like limitations on the elevator, I heard that was a disaster in Hong Kong. It took, like 30 minutes to wait for an elevator when you limit it to 2 people. So, maybe the first week or 2 that works, but eventually, I kind of tend to agree with Chris, and maybe we both talk to our friends over at Gensler a lot, and we hear what they have to say about, quickly going back. People will quickly go back to at some point, whether that's quick as 6 months or 18 months, I don't know. We'll go back to the, how we'd done things before, with some of these permanent adjustments that we're going to have, the cleaning, all those kind of things. And we're going to see that. And the automatic door, in March, I had our office manager call our landlord saying, can you get somebody out there to open the door for us? Right. There's little things that make sense, but it costs money for sure. Right. That's a security guard that can't be doing something else. He's going to be opening the door for everybody.
Yeah, you need to open that building.
We got to have open.
That's right.
Everywhere. Right?
For sure.
Yeah.
There's no doubt. There's no doubt. For sure.
Yeah. I echo, what Chris and Paul are saying. Really what we're trying to do is to take a phased approach, at all of our assets, right? So we had kind of the immediate action that we took to kind of make sure that, safety was assured, cleaning was thought through, the buildings were staying open, how we were staffing them. Now we're stabilized now across the portfolio. So now we move into what are the incremental changes that we need to make, that we can make in the near term as, May 15th hits, as June 15th hits, as we get into the summer and people do start really coming back into the buildings. We're looking at a series of certainly just graphics, communication, wayfinding, making sure that when people arrive at the property that they know, there's a comfort about where they should go, how they should behave, how they get into the elevators. Certainly that gets much more into the operational aspects of the common areas of the projects, PPE, those types of things. We're probably going to look at, really putting a lot of informational graphics, in the lobbies, in the elevators, in the hallways. And I think that, is, we're deploying that kind of as we speak, and that is truly a property by property strategy. And then it's the long range, implications of this, and certainly technology is a big part of that. James, I know you're seeing a lot of pickup in demand for Openpath. Certainly, we see touchless access as a huge driver going forward. We're hearing, quite a bit from the cities that we own assets in, that those are likely, touchless access likely going to be part of, city code going forward, we're hearing. And there's going to be a number of these improvements, and likely, as we all know, the pendulum is going to swing too far, and code is going to get much more stringent on these issues. But I almost see some corollaries to like LEED initiatives from a few years ago, and you're going to see, really kind of 3 types of landlords. Landlords that are institutional, need their assets to be at the highest quality from a leasing standpoint, from a market perception standpoint, from a fiduciary standpoint. So I think you'll see those landlords, really invest in the long term kind of resiliency of the buildings. I think you'll see another subset that are really more kind of eye-dropping capital in, looking for opportunities to be able to charge, through CAMs back to the tenants when they do, be a little bit less to kind of open up the purse strings. And then I think you'll see a number of landlords who just don't do much, right? They're going to wait and see. Maybe they've got a building that doesn't need to make adjustments from a competitive standpoint. They're well leased. They've got, good tenancy, long-term leases. They may not do much. And I think it's really going to run the gamut. But I think that would be really interesting to see what municipalities start to require. If you look at LEED, certainly that is something that it was a huge focus for a long time. Then it worked its way into the code. So now if you're building a new building by code, you're going to be LEED silver without even having to go through the registration process. So I would just say just one last point with respect to technology. I think, air quality, air handling, MEP systems, those are going to be, I think, the most difficult to kind of be able to figure out kind of what is the future there, because those are stickier, harder to make changes to. But I do think you're going to see a lot of, demand from tenants that the air quality, not only does it have the latest and greatest technology, but there's transparency around the data that, being able to track the data with respect to air quality, being able to, to show the data. I think you're going to see this real theme, and it's going to be the technology that I think is going to carry us forward in terms of building transparency. Buildings are going to be seen as living and breathing organisms, and people are going to want to know what's the humidity on my floor. Scanning, people's movements around the floor. When you walk into a conference room, well, how many people were in the conference room? How long were they there? Was it clean since they were in there? Some of that stuff, I think I agree, with the others, is going to be a temporary, knee-jerk reaction. There probably are going to be certain techniques that come from that are going to be, longer term, I think.
Long term, for sure.
Rob, I think you're really right on the transparency. I think on the transparency, I mean, we all have our BMS systems and such like that. We're talking with a company we use, Equium, which is a tenant engagement platform, about how we have air quality and such, either on digital boards or sent to their phones. I do think that the people are going to really care about it. I would also say, though, we're going to have 15% probably in unemployment when it's all said and done. There's a lot of talk about how much power employees have in all of this right now. When the economy is struggling, I think that that's why I'm a little pessimistic that you're going to see major, it's not going to be the Jetsons. It's just not going to happen that quickly. Think about fire codes with sprinklers, think about seismic. Those things are implemented and they change over a period of time. So I think the world of office that we see in 5 years are going to look a lot like the Jetsons. Yeah. What it's going to look like next year, people just don't have it in their CapEx. They don't, it's going to take a little bit of time. And so to me, it's going to come down to the buildings that have, and I got to come up with a different word than high touch, because we don't want to be touching people, but where tenants and clients feel like they matter in a building. That's what's going to really differentiate, because I don't think the capital expenditures can happen in the short term radically enough to have major impact.
Okay, so let me pause.
That's really interesting.
I want to hear Rob's point, but just one thing I wanted to add is,
no problem.
Looking at some of these questions that are coming in. And if you look at the poll results, I'd say that if you ask people what they think in terms of who should pay for a lot of the tenant improvements associated post-COVID, you'll see the overwhelming group, it feels like it's shared between the tenants and the landlords. So there's an expectation that there's going to be some cost the landlords take on and some cost the tenant has to take on, and it's kind of a share there. But I think Rob lined up the idea of there's different caliber of landlords out there, building owners, kind of the 3 different groups. And what we've seen as we've talked to building owners across the US and Canada is that very forward-looking, larger holders and property managers in the Lincoln Property vein, in the Chris Rising Realty vein, are willing to make these kind of investments and are doing so. Yet in that second and maybe even third tier, there's just like hey, I don't even have capital reserves for this. Everyone has sort of turned around and complained that their lenders are going to come after them, and they don't feel like they're going to spend any money on any of this stuff. And they're complaining left and right about not getting rent paid. And so I'm just curious, what you think about this, in that, like, is there really a risk that, these guys who are not the big companies are going to kind of go under as a result of this, that people aren't going to come back with those changes aren't invested in, or the lenders are going to come after them and basically take over their buildings? So is that really something that you guys think is going to happen in a material way, or is that just a lot of excuses from folks who are very old school, real estate people?
It's a great question. I mean, my view is that the market's going to sort itself out, and that there are going to be landlords that put their head in the sand, and those are the ones that are going to either fall back on really strong rent rolls where they don't have risk. They're going to probably be fine. But those that have near-term expirations, those that have rollover, those that have to keep tenants happy and in the space paying rent, like that, they're going to get hurt, right, if they're not willing to address these issues. And that, again, case by case, building by building, it doesn't some buildings are going to require a lot more work than others to keep, kind of to keep up. But just an example of where the rubber is really meeting the road on this issue is we've got 3 buildings, that we're building on spec and that we're 18 months away from delivery. We're just coming out of the ground. These are Class A creative office buildings in really high quality locations with institutional partners. And so the thought is that there may be a flight to quality, and that companies are going to be looking for the latest and greatest, in terms of technology, in terms of MEP systems, in terms of thoughtful elevator approach. So we've got an opportunity with these new buildings to be able to, and we're going through each of these buildings as we speak to really, in some cases, redesign the approach to make sure that when they deliver in a year or year and a half, that they are the most technologically advanced properties, in the city, because we do have the benefit of having new construction to be able to, and we're not so far along that we can't make these adjustments. But here you've got landlords and owners who are saying, we're going to invest to make sure that we have, this technology embedded into our assets, because we think that the high quality companies that we're trying to attract into these buildings are going to require that. They're going to demand that. So we'll see. I mean, it's obviously going to play out over the next year.
I think Rob's exactly right. Unfortunately, I think this is going to turn out to be one of the best buying opportunities we've ever seen, because I just think there's multi-generational ownership or poorly capitalized ownership who are going to throw their hands up and just say, I got to get out of this business. It's changed from I just deliver the building and tenants pay for everything, to this high connectivity. I'm stealing that word that someone put in the chat. This high connectivity, this investment and it's going to be haves and haves not, because I think businesses are really going to look at it and say, why do I have an office? I fundamentally believe you're going to, as soon as the Rams or any sports teams stop using, headquarters to have practices and all that, maybe companies won't, but you can't have culture. You can't have an identity. You can't be pushing towards goals unless there is some human connection. So I think office hubs are going to be there, and there's going to be haves and have not. And I just think, I think it's going to be painful. My personal opinion is going to be a painful 2, 3, 4 years in real estate as these haves and have nots shake itself out, as companies go through fits and starts on how big they need to be and stuff like that. I'm pretty pessimistic in that regard, but I do believe that people who deliver high connectivity with their tenants and they develop those relationships are going to be successful in the end. And I still think it's going to be a terrific asset class to invest in.
Yeah, I think to that point, Chris, just quickly, I'd love to get Paul's thoughts as well, that it is for part of my clumsy language, it's a fantastic opportunity for landlords to differentiate themselves as those that are going to lean in on this and really brand their buildings as having done all these extra measures. And I think tenants are going to be looking for that. Wouldn't you say so, Paul? That they're going to obviously notice, and that flight to quality is going to go on the leasing side as well.
Yeah, I think that's true. I do think a differentiator for many tenants is just cost or price, their rent, right? So, there will be some landlords that won't do the same investing. They won't attract the same tenants, but they will attract tenants based on that they're going to offer something at a lower cost. Right. And there's a niche for that as well. But, in the institutional world, the operators and the sponsors who've adopted these things, who've thought about resilience before that was something that was tracked by funds and things, that thought about sustainability and those kind of things, that they've attracted, different tenants, maybe tenants that are willing to pay more in rent because they wanted to, they were using things, they were using their office to attract human capital. So I think there is a fit for those owners that don't adopt everything, that maybe just do what the government tells you have to do. And that's just, offering the cheapest rent or whatever it is. It's at a discount to these guys, but won't be the same kind of service. And those tenants that are willing to pay more will flock to that. And capital, whether it be institutional equity capital or debt capital, will find its niche too, and it will find, it'll attract itself. The more discerning capital will attract itself to those sponsors who have adopted these measures, and they'll underwrite higher tenant retention and those kind of things. We were on a call this morning with a lender where we were underwriting. We're talking about underwriting, how we need to underwrite it as the broker putting the deal together and the lender, as well as the appraisers coming back and saying, hey, all of these buildings, this is retail, there's going to be higher cleaning costs and some, just human capital for this shopping center. So those are things that lenders will look at as well. And that goes into the calculus of underwriting a deal, right? Whether you're the lender or the equity investor, whatever.
So Paul, I have a question for you, because one of my theories is really that the baby boomers, this is the last gasp. The baby boomers who are running companies today are all going to be eased out or pushed out, and the millennials and the Gen Xers are going to be taking over, and that'll bring a different mindset. But how are you going to live in a world where we don't wear ties anymore, Paul? I mean, I can't imagine wearing something that doesn't have a drawstring.
Well done. Well
That's
played.
very true. I was thinking about, since I didn't have a tie on, whether I was going to just dial in and not show my face on this thing so that nobody really knew.
Paul, Chris has been holding on to that question for about an hour.
We need him from Matt. We need an Hermes tie collection for face masks from you.
Look, I'm just glad
I can make a few.
glad you showed up wearing clothes, because that's something I was a little worried about, to be honest, based on prior calls. I'll finish up with one question that I think is interesting. I'd love to get all your perspectives. If you look at the legal arrangement on a lease, right, between a tenant and a landlord, and you think of clauses associated with force majeure in this kind of pandemic, and you think of the debt contracts and relationships between debt holders and the buildings who take out debt, and then you also think about the investors behind those lenders. Do you feel like there's going to be any kind of impact and change in kind of force majeure, this kind of situation happening in the legal contracts, relationships, and obligations that we start to set up post-COVID for the next set of leases, the next set of loans? And how do you think that impacts this from a business perspective in terms and conditions perspective?
Well, Chris, you're a former attorney, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I either practiced and got good, or I was really bad, so I wasn't one for long. But I'll tell you, here's what I think is going to happen. I think everybody has to know that force majeure does not relieve a tenant the obligation of paying rent. So whether things get changed in terms of a pandemic gets put in, I was talking to Tony Natsis at Allen Atkins. We were exchanging emails. Look, every new lease, this is going to be the negotiation of where this fits in. But it won't relieve people the obligation to pay rent, because otherwise the buildings aren't financeable and things won't get done. So I think there's going to be, I think the bigger issue is what happens around business interruption insurance. Mm-hmm. Insurance companies, we ask, if you want a rent modification, show us your financials, show us that you've been denied business interruption insurance, and show us whether you applied for a PPP loan or not. Then we can start having a discussion. To a T, the insurance industry has said no on business interruption because it's a pandemic. That's going to change. I think there's got to be some federal backstop on that, because the whole point of business interruption insurance, if something bad happens, you get some compensation. But I'm a cynic. I will tell you, I think we're going to see changes around the edges, and the world will be very different in 5 to 7 years. But over the next 2 or 3 years, people are going to come back slowly. They're going to get tired of face masks once they start to feel safe. And we'll have some new leadership. So, work hours will be different. When people come in will be different. The office will probably be a lot more about creativity and rah-rah, and the work gets done at home or at satellite offices. I just don't think once people get over the fear factor that people are going to want a massive change in their life. They'll have little ones. They want to not touch a door. That makes all the sense in the world to me. I haven't wanted to do it before and don't want to do it now. But I just don't think that there's enough of and it could be, if this goes, hey, if we're talking in September and October, I may change my tune on this. But the way I see the push to open, and it's, I don't think it's going to change as much as we all might hope for in a perfect world.
Yeah. Look, there's a lot of questions that have sort of come up, and I just want to make sure we start to sort of look at them. I don't know if you guys can see the Q&A. I think there's, a lot of things we kind of talked about, but I guess one of them is, what do we do about the OpEx versus CapEx that's come up, whether it's doormen or security guards or, labor as compared to technology? How do you guys think about that? Because, in the short term, you can solve some problems with some people, but over the long term, you really want to have technology in place that allows you to scale. How do you think about, OpEx versus CapEx right now? Are you more willing to put in OpEx and just deal with stuff, or do you actually want to make capital improvements to these buildings?
Yeah, it's a great question. I actually think with respect to leases going forward, force majeure, certainly those provisions are going to be battlegrounds. I think, CAM charges, pass-throughs, OpEx is going to be where the real battleground is going to be, and the real friction will be between landlords and tenants. And I think there it's going to come down to the market, right? It is landlords that have leverage because they've got best-in-class, product are going to be able to push more of that onto the tenants, and buildings that are more antiquated, that are less desirable, are going to probably have to take on more of those operating, costs. And so it's going to be a negotiation, a very specific negotiation, but I do think you're going to see a real focus on the additional operating measures that every building, most buildings are going to have to take on. How much of that gets, charged back to the tenants through CAMs versus, are considered to be base building expenses. And there'll be, a lot of hassling over those issues.
Yep.
Yeah.
I know we also had some questions on, a variety of different methodologies that are getting put in place, whether it's, 4G and 5G LTE to make buildings better connected, whether it's, opening windows, making it so that you can get, better air circulation. I see a lot of different sort of, interesting ideas. Maybe as a sort of way to sort of finally wrap it up, if each of you can kind of sort of go through and give me your kind of final thoughts based on the questions that you've seen, the topics that we've covered, and just to kind of wrap it up with, what you think is most relevant for people to start thinking about, acting on, or doing. And we'll then finish up after that. So why don't we start with Paul, since he's the best looking of the group.
Go put my tie on.
Not the
I gave Chris so much grief for having a beard a couple of years ago, and look at me. Look, I think the biggest part of this is, there will be some macro things that industries, lenders, whatever, the different parts of our industry will react to. But then a lot of these things will come down to dealing with the individual asset, the owner, and there are going to be some specifics around that, right? Are they getting rent paid? How can a lender make them do something if they don't have any resources versus those that do? So look, I think I think everybody's, it's pretty amazing how everybody really is bought into this, quarantine and work from home. And I think that's the general attitude of a lot of institutional investors and lenders. They're going to be as cooperative as possible. They're going to, recognize their rights and their contracts, whether it's a lease contract, a loan contract, or either the lender or the borrower or whatever. But I think everybody generally wants to, try to make it work for everybody, right? It as best possible, right? So everybody's going to give a little bit, right? We've already seen lenders give a little bit. They've granted some maybe nothing significant, but we've certainly seen plenty of lenders say, okay, don't pay any amortization for the next 3 months. Save some cash flow there. Just pay interest only. Take some money out of reserves to use for something else, right? So there's a cooperation that's part of this that we, as a whole industry and society, have done a pretty damn good job at, right? I mean, we're respecting these things. We walk down the street, we pull our mask up when we get near somebody to respect that safety. So I do think those are going to be the pieces that help everybody get through the rough patches of these tougher negotiations and costs and who's bearing what cost and that kind of thing.
I want to make sure we have time for everybody. So let's go. Rob, you're next.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think a lot more at this point, a lot more questions than answers. You're going to start to really see, I think, people that can quickly adapt. Those are going to be the winners. Those that are slower to adapt, I think, are going to have a harder time over the next 6 to 12 months. I think you're going to see a lot of people looking at best practices, and you're going to see I think a lot of dialogue around what's working, what's not. throw away what's not, keep doing what is, and, you know, continued just tons of iterations, I think, over the next, you know, 4 or 5 months. And I also just think, kind of from a technology standpoint, this is going to be a great accelerator for prop tech. I think it just is the event that had to happen. It's been slow to adapt, and I think, you know, this is going to be the event we'll look back to say that's where it was a really defining moment for prop tech.
Yeah. Thanks,
Well
Chris.
said.
Yeah, I think Rob said it very well. I don't know if I can add much, but I'll say 2 things. This was a pandemic and a forced government shutdown, and people are scared. So I think when we come out of this, it's going to be, people will come to buildings and to places where they feel safe and where they feel part of a community that has some trust. And I think those are the winners in the end, and that'll trust will be created through technology and a few other things. I mean, I will just tell you though, all of our assets are open and we have essential businesses in it. And it amazes me when I hear some of the security reports back where people are coming in the building not wearing masks, and when our security people say you really can't come in without it, people are throwing fits. So there's something going on that we haven't quite worked through yet. But I think that where we'll be successful are the people who deal with people's fears and people's trust. And PropTech's going to have a big part of that. And being part of the community, I think, is going to be a big part of that.
Thank you. And Michael?
Just quickly, James, you know, as somebody that's tried to be an ambassador and building this community of real estate tech enthusiasts and stakeholders, I mean, and also obviously very involved in the real estate space, couldn't be more proud of our industry for leaning in and leading through this chaotic period where every town, every state, every city, every company is trying to grapple with the way forward. So thanks to Paul, Rob, Chris, and particularly you, James. Your leadership is just, you know, while nobody has all the answers, it's just helping a lot of people answer some of the questions and get some clarity about where we're going. And it's just a time to be proud of our industry collectively.
Look, I think that's great, and thank you. You know, we're all advocating at the end of the day for the tenant. The tenant is the person who we depend on to come to work every day, to use our buildings, and to be productive and build out all the economy that we enjoy every single day. Our job, all of us, from a lender perspective, landlord, a property management perspective, Openpath access control perspective, and also from a CREtech, you know, perspective, we are here but to serve, to make sure that people can experience the built world, and that is what we're trying to do. So with that, I'd like to thank the panelists for all of their feedback today. I know we went a little late, and we'll end it here and look forward to next week when we'll have
Can't wait.
Another interesting conversation. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Thanks,
Thank
James.
you, everybody.
Thank you
Thanks,
very
guys.
much.
It's fun.
Thanks, James.
Great
Appreciate
listening.
it.
Thank you.
A lot of fun.